Welcome back, everybody. As promised last time, we're going to dive into the dash and steering portion of X231. That's what we have right here. And it's still sitting on the wooden mock-up stand that I created for it to display it at the Jordan, Minnesota tractor show 2 years ago when they had the Minneapolis-Moline prototype and experimental get-together. So we're going to start out with the same compare and contrast prototype versus production, and I placed the production dash up on this metal can because it puts it on the same level as the prototype, so it better illustrates the difference in operator station platforms between the two tractors. So now that the stage is set, let's get into it. We might as well start at the top with the steering wheels. X231 has a earlier model ZB steering wheel, and it is different from the production 445 steering wheel. They look the same, they're the same flat 3-spoke design, they're the same diameter. The main difference is in the hub, because X231 and the ZB uses a 1-inch diameter steering shaft. The production 445s, they took that shaft down to a 7/8 diameter. So you can't make a ZB steering wheel fit a 445, and you won't make a 445 steering wheel fit X231. And these are a tapered fit on the shaft with a single woodruff key. So X231 steering wheel starts out with a taper fit of 1 inch at the bottom, and it necks down to 7/8 at the top. Whereas the 445 steering wheel starts at 7/8 at the bottom and then necks down to 3/4 at the top. And sure enough, looking at X231 steering wheel, you get down, you can see that spoke's a little bent, the wheel's kind of wonky, and of course all of the grip materials cracking, loosening up, so we'll be replacing the wheel for sure. Working on down to the throttle levers next. They're both positioned in roughly the same place. X231's lever is quite a bit longer than the 445, and they even added a thread-on knob, so it's a little bit fancier than just the plain rod that sticks out over there. Typical X231 as well. It's been broken clean off at one point, ugly welded back on, so we'll have to correct that. But I'm assuming that the prototype lever here works off the same principle as the 445, in that there would be a taper bushing on the lever down inside this sleeve. And with the spring back here holding constant pressure down on the lever, that seats the bushing into the sleeve, and it provides the friction for you to set that throttle lever in whichever position, and it'll hold itself there. We'll know for sure once we get it taken apart. Otherwise, we have a curious double lever at the bottom of it. So this short leg of it has a very small hole, and then the longer one is your main pivot for the rest of the throttle linkage. Whereas production 445, there's the same spring, and we just have a single simple lever at the base. Looking further down still, X231's dash has the older generation, which would be ZB model and prior, clock, face, dial type hour meter located prominently top center. And of course the 445s didn't use a meter, anything like this. They completely redesigned it and incorporated it in with the rest of the gauge cluster, which would have been in the panel up here above the dash. X231 also has a gauge cluster that goes rather in this area here above the dash, but that sits on top of the fuel tank. We won't see that for a while yet. The other oddity in this area is this open hole right here, and there used to be a second lever would come up and out, and it would pivot much like the throttle lever, and that was a part of the early ampli-torque setup. So the other end of that mystery lever would come down and pivot right here where I've got this opening sealed off with a cork in this top cover. And of course, we've covered this before, there were other pivots that went through this area here. That's a stop for one of the arms. Another shaft would have went down through this opening that they had since plugged, and when they did away with that more complicated ampli-torque system, they replaced it all just with the vertical lever. So that is a detail right there that is forever lost to history. We'll never know exactly what used to live in that spot. Down on the side now, X231 has this really cool cast iron pivoting lever, and this was for engaging the starter. So a rod would go in this end of the lever and run forward to the contact switch that was on the starter. And when you wanted to crank the engine, you would just pull up on that lever, it would pull the rod, close the contact switch, and the engine would crank. Why they took the time to make that out of cast iron, I don't know. They could have just welded up a simple lever. This actually has a 10X number of its own. We'll see that better when we get it cleaned up. But that's another prototype oddity that you'll only find on X231. One of my favorite little features of the tractor. The production 445 then, they didn't use a lever. They just had this little round opening right here that they ran a round rod through that went up to that contact switch on the starter, and then the rod would come out through this opening. There was a little loop on the end so that you could grab onto it, and then you would just pull that rod and crank the engine. Final comparison now is in the construction of the dashes themselves. And X231's dash, even though it has all these rounded edges, rounded corners, contours, bump ups, this was all handmade. All right, and somebody put a lot of time into this because it's made out of sheet steel. You can tell. And they bent it and they formed it and they welded it. And once again, we'll see better once we get this cleaned up. But all of the weld lines, all the joints, all the seams that they just flushed enough to be not outwardly noticeable. Somebody put a significant amount of time into this aspect right here. And even though they worked so hard at making, rounded edges and clean lines, you compare that to the production dash and they went all cast iron here. So they just blew this dash out of the water with the contours and the rounds and the lines but that's something that's really only achievable when you can cast it and make it a single piece quickly and efficiently. Whereas this, even though it probably took 10 times the amount of labor to create as the cast version, it still looks pretty flat and blocky now by comparison. But for me, this is where the cool factor of the prototypes just go clear off the charts. I would love to know who created this and how much time it took them to do it. So, final talking point before we start taking X231's dash and steering wheel apart is the difference between the operator stations on the prototype to the production. You can see they placed the operator significantly lower on the production tractor than they did on the prototype. X231 here has you perched quite high in the air. The foot plates on X231 are, I would say, in the upper 2/3 region of the transmission case, whereas on the 445 they took these plates down to about where the brace anchors right here. That's the difference in height in which you'd be sitting on X231. And where the shifter box opening is here, it's still evident on the dash where it's located. And as I stated before, I have both these dashes placed at the same level. Here's the same transmission shifter box receptacle right there. So that's how much higher you are on X231 than the 445. And the 445 steering wheel is it's angled, it's canted back a little bit more than X231. X231's more flat, big rig style driving. So just interesting little tidbits and differences between prototype to production. Lots of small changes in that aspect, but they add up at the end of the day. So that's about all we needed to compare. I think with X231's dash here, we're going to start by getting the old steering wheel pulled off and then just work our way on down. Okay, I have quite the elaborate puller setup happening here, and because the steering wheel is on a tapered press fit, it's going to take a little bit to get it to pop loose. And I could do this with the mechanical puller or the old forcing screw, it would pop it just fine. But I'll admit, once you get used to hydraulic pullers, it's pretty hard to go back to trying to crank on a forcing screw and creating all that friction. These just pull, okay? And I'm getting soft in my old age. So, plus we can actually watch the pressure gauge and see what tonnage this actually lets go. So, start dialing up some pressure on it. I've got the nut backed off about 2 threads, so it'll catch anything that might want to go. So we are at, let's see right here, about 2 tons. Keep this under control just in case. All right, about 4 tons. It popped. So it actually went pretty smooth. Even though we've popped it loose from the taper, it's still rather stuck. I think it's quite rusty. There we go. Yes. Quite rusty, having to get that hub off of the key. Yeah, I think we might have another wall hanger piece right here. I've got a new steering wheel for X231. I think I want to just keep this one in its current state. Keep it all original. Working on down the steering shaft, I'll have to loosen this set screw so that we can take that collar off. So the collar sets the downward travel limit, and it looks like the back of this U-joint flange against that support bushing sets the upward limit. So we have a little bit of end flip going on right there, so that bushing has possibly moved up a little bit. But here's one thing I can't figure out. Trying to detect any play in that shaft, there's nothing at the top. Just a little click down here where the shaft goes through the bushing, and this bushing looks like it has received plenty of grease, which is an anomaly for X231. The drain plugs on everything were pristine because it never even received an oil change. So this baffles me why they were able to put so much grease into that steering shaft. A little bit of click there, but boy, it is not bad. But looking at it, I think that's what this hole is for on the side, because you can look in and there's that grease zerk right in there. So that would be your easy access, because once the fuel tank goes in, it's going to block you out of all of this area here. You still could probably reach up under it and guide it in, but I bet that's what that is for now. That makes sense. Access to that grease fitting. This might be the only maintenance point on the whole tractor that ever received any attention at all. Well, that loosened up easily. Where's the fight? Makes me nervous. The other shoe is bound to drop. All right, collar is free. I've determined that the shaft is just tight where it goes through this part right here. So I'm going to clean the surface and see if we can't make the road a little bit easier to travel. That helped considerably. There's our steering shaft. That U-joint is shot. This one we had to hammer apart when we took the rest of it out of the tractor. We're done with the display stand. Hopefully the next time any part of X231 goes to a tractor show, the display stand will be its own four wheels. So, fuel tank bracket, front fuel tank support bracket, coming off right now. And there's dash. Next, I'm going to pull our little pivoting starter lever off the side. Just have to get that rusty cotter pin out of there. Here's our lever on the outside, so just a pin with a flat washer behind it on the inside. And it looks like the shaft is stuck in the lever, so we'll free that up, but yeah, just a cotter pin on each end. And I mentioned this has a 10X on it. It's very faint. I think you can just barely pick it up. 10X, it looks like 5822. 10X 5822. That is so neat. So the final piece we have is the pivoting throttle lever. And let's see if we indeed have that taper bushing up in here. We just have the heavy spring at the top, washer with the cotter pin. So we'll see if we can peel that pin out. There we go. Washer, spring. Let's see if we can, oh wow, look at this. See down here, let's get that brace out of the way. Didn't realize it, but this pivot lever's loose on there. So does that mean that's gonna come off a lot easier? Looked like it might have had a roll pin in. There we go. Now we got it out. Ooh, we have some bracing going on down here? I think so. So maybe that wore and they built it up. We do have a taper bushing and we're welded to there. All right. Interesting developments. It'll be neat to know what this looks like once we get everything cleaned up. Okay, back down to our bottom pivot down here. I noted that it was loose on the shaft and there is no trace of a roll pin present. So I'm not sure how well X231's throttle is operating with this piece just spinning at will, unless it was rusted in place enough that it didn't really know the difference. But I think, yeah, there we are. Got it off. Do we have any numbers here? I'm not seeing anything for a casting number, 10X or production. So maybe this is just a mystery piece. I don't know. Once again, we'll get a better look at it once we get it cleaned up. But oh, look at that. Here, let's see. Yeah, the other side, that cross-drilled hole is hogged out. It looks like there's something in there. Let's take this lever out and have a better look. Now that we can pull it out. Yeah, that's not a round hole anymore. This side is even worse. Look at how that is hogged out. Let's see if... Is that just grease in there, or is it what's left of an old pen? Nope, it's just like dirt. Yeah, it was just some dirt in there. So there was no pen present at all locating that lever here onto the shaft, but that looks a little ugly. Something had definitely been running loose in there for a while. Poor X231, man. No wonder why Christine is so mean. All right, disassembly continues. This is rather light, but let's see if we can get the shaft out of our starter pivot lever. I've cleaned it up once again. Try to make removal as easy as possible. And I've exploded cast iron items before by trying to press stuck shafts out. So I'll only go so far with this one, pressure-wise. I just want to see if we can make it move. I'm just dialing it up little bits at a time. There, we're moving. Yep, it's good. There, I feel pretty good about it. It's moving easier all the time. Okay, that's about all we have there. We might be able to tap it out now. Yeah. Oh, look at that. There, we saved the lever. Okay, everybody, contrary to typical X231 style, this dash work has been going really rather smooth until I looked at the steering shaft to get dimensions for a replacement universal joint, and then I found the fight. Just when I thought I was going to get it by easy, we found the fight one more time, so shouldn't be surprised. Let's do the recap. On the dash itself, I spent some time scraping grease to get a better look at everything, and I think I found the only 2 points on this tractor that received any care at all. The bushings on the bottom and on the top for the steering shaft. I don't know why they chose to take care of those 2 points, but really no wear there at all. Nothing that is going to require any work. So just a few corners to flatten back out, and I think the dash is pretty much a clean up and go. And the front fuel tank support, we have a little bit of straightening to do here. Sight down the top of that. We get down to this end down here. It's got a twist in it and it crooks up a little bit. We can flatten that back down, no problem. Same with the flat piece down here. Yeah, it's got a little bit of a wave. Flatten that out, clean it up. That'll be ready to go. Steering wheel, I had decided going into it that I wasn't trying to refurbish this one, so that's the new one I mentioned. We're ready to go on that. And to finish up, the throttle shaft. And there's a bit of work to do to this piece. I'll have to close up that wallowed out hole at the bottom and probably re-drill it for a fresh roll pin. This brazing at the top that I speculated could have possibly been from a prior buildup, that is not the case. After I cleaned it up, had a good look at it, it became evident that they brazed our taper bushing on at the top. So that's what that is from. And all of our ugly weld here was indeed from them having broken the whole top portion of the lever off. When you sight down it and you see how far to this direction that top portion cants in relation to the rest of it, yeah, and even where it bends, it looks like it's got a little bit of a swale. They definitely caught that on something, snapped it off. So we'll redo that and make that all nice. The knob on the end of it, though, I think I want to try to save that. Just like, you know, I saved as many handles and knobs as I could on 5J1113, the D2. I can clean that up and make it look good, but the reason why I think I want to save it, A, it's cool, it's been on there forever, but B, this is what the replacement knobs look like, and they're just round, whereas this one has that nice ridge that goes through the center of it. So if at all possible, I'm going to try to make sure we save that knob. It doesn't seem like it wants to come off either, so we'll just leave that in place while we do the rest of the repairs. And our mystery bracket at the bottom, I think there was a number there, but I don't think it was ever cast in very legibly. So I tried just cleaning the high spots with some sandpaper to see if I could clean it up and read anything. I can't make heads or tails of it, but that was certainly numbers and letters at one point. So this is possibly a 10X piece. I have no way of verifying. Now for the fight. Old Christine loves a good fight. She never misses an opportunity. So my goal with the steering shaft was to pop this universal joint out, get some dimensions, and get a new one on the way. And then I found this one has a non-serviceable U-joint in it. It's the first one down from the steering wheel. Steering wheel goes up here. And I think the reason for it has to do with the design of the dash. We'll get to that in just a second. But that really threw a wrench into my plans. You can't take this apart without cutting it. I had expected it to be more like this one down here, which is the entire yoke is removable. It just pins onto the shaft, and the yoke bores are open like this, so you can drive the old caps out, take the cross out, put a new cross in, new caps, couple clips. You've renewed that joint, you're good to go. You can't do this with this non-serviceable unit. Everything's closed. So I looked at it and I found right here, you won't see it on camera, but here's a picture. It says patent pending Blood Brothers, number 36. Now, neither the prior model ZB or the later model 445 tractors used a non-serviceable joint anywhere in the steering like this. Here's a parts manual scan of the ZB. We have replaceable U-joints and yokes here, here, and here. Same with the later 445. Entirely replaceable universal joints here, here, and down here. So I'll throw the steering shaft back in because this is what makes things start to make sense, at least as far as my theory goes. Get it all in right like that. So we have our lower support bracket for the shaft here with the bushing, and they put the hour meter in this hole right here, and it has a can on the back of it. It's like a large gauge basically, so that can sticks up a bit, so they had to make room enough for that. And the lower part of the shaft has to stick out of this cutaway in the side of the dash so that it can come out and start going down the outside of the tractor. And I think they found themselves in a bind. I think they built the dash first, and then they built the steering shaft to fit the prototype dash, because we had to pretty much had to put the support bracket right here. We couldn't go up any farther with it. Otherwise, we'd start getting into the hour meter. We couldn't come down with it anymore because we have to start angling the shaft out the side. And the further down we had to relocate the bracket means the U-joint has to come further down, which increases the angle on the shaft. That starts to become unworkable. So I think they realized they could pretty much only put it right here, but they couldn't fit a typical ZB universal joint yoke on there. So that's why I think this end has a typical ZB style yoke and hub. This end has a similarly styled hub that roll pins on, so we can take the shaft out of here, but this end doesn't have a hub because they didn't have room for a hub. They also then didn't have room for a roll pin, so they just welded it right to the end of the steering shaft. Also looking at this, these universal joints were assembled with yoke halves, okay? So we had this yoke half was one piece, this one was another one. So we just placed them together over the two pegs of the cross onto the shaft, welded it all, made it permanent, and then we did the same thing with these two halves and just welded them to this hub. And being that this is a non-patented Blood Brothers design, is it possible that this maybe perhaps was a bit of a prototype piece from them? We know how Delco Remy gave Moline the green tag engineering sample electrical, like starters, generators, things like that. X231 had all of those things. Is this something that they had on the shelf or were offered to put into use and decided this is the first place where we could really try it out, being that it's so much different from all the rest of them they used? Oh, who knows? I did a deep dive on the Googles regarding this Blood Brothers universal joint and learned a few interesting things. There were actually 3 Blood Brothers and 1 Blood Nephew that formed a company in the early 1900s building bicycles. And then by the 19-teens, they had moved into building actual race cars. Out of that, they became pretty well known for the quality and the designs of their universal joints. So they kept on with it until 1936 when they were bought out by the Standard Steel Spring Company of Pennsylvania, but the Blood Brothers name continued on, and by the 1950s, they were even providing automobile manufacturers with entire drive shafts. In 1975, then, they were absorbed by Rockwell International, and the name ceased to be. Now I have another problem on my hands. Knowing what I know now about the history of the Blood Brothers universal joint, and also knowing that I'm tied to these same dimensions if I want to have a workable shaft in that prototype dash, I think I need to try to save as much of this old Blood Brothers U-joint as possible. The only way I can go about doing anything to it, though, is to start cutting it all apart. And that is probably going to be an episode all its own. I know I don't have time to get into that today, and I still haven't really formulated my battle plan, but the gears are starting to turn. I have a few ideas already, and I think that's going to be kind of an interesting episode. I'm not trying to like stretch this out here, but I can't really think of another way around it. Even if I try to completely replace that entire universal joint, I'm still having to cut and probably weld to the shaft because you don't have real estate enough for a set screw or a keyway or rabbit holes. Everywhere I turn is another rabbit hole. So I think this is a good jumping off point here. And this was a nice lighter duty episode after all the hydraulic stuff. I think I was starting to tax everybody's brains a little bit. So I think that does it for today. Next time, I think we'll probably start digging into a universal joint and see how far that takes us. So as always, everyone, I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope to see you back again next time.